and welcome to another Rendaa Studios After Effects tutorial. I'm McKinsey Chriswell, and today we're going to be taking a look at some rack-focused designs. So let's get started. First thing we're going to need to do is to create a new composition. So come up here. Let's see. We can name this tutorial. Oops, composition. For this tutorial, we'll just keep it at 1080. Using three textures here. The first of which is a floorboard texture. The second of which is a concrete texture. Again, just nice concrete. And then we have a floor liner. This is basically just a texture that's a piece of wood. And the reason we have this, let me show you real quick, is, let's see, switch to quarter, turn this off, is you can see our 3D world setup here, and it's out of focus, but if we were to turn off this liner layer, we've got two of them that are basically doing the same thing. You can see our wall looks very weird. There's a very clear line where the wall and the floor hit each other, and it just looks weird, especially if we were to turn off the camera depth of field. You can see it's just a very harsh hit against the two, and it's very easy to tell where they hit, and it kind of shows you the seams of the design, and that's something you never really want to see. So just by putting a simple floor liner layer here, we're able to hopefully hide that. We've got a liner and then a shadow on it, so it just kind of helps to sell the effect. But let's go ahead and get started. We're going to first off need a new camera, so layer, new camera. We're going to be working with 50mm. So let's go ahead and bring in some of these textures and set them up. First off, we have our floorboard. We'll just click to make it 3D. Grab our rotate tool and rotate it on its axis. Let's see. Alright. Moving it down and rotating it just until I get it in a position I like. Alright, that looks fine for now. What you'll notice is the edges of the design you can see in the back as the perspective, it's just, you can see the back of the layer, but not the front. And a really quick tip I've discovered to fix that, quite recently actually, is we take the corner pin effect and drop it on here. You can just take these sides and drag them out in order to just kind of even things a little bit. Okay, so that looks nice. Let's see. You'd have to be careful though, because if you get them off too much, you'll start to see your back line here will start to look lopsided or slanted, and just we'll go ahead and bring in our concrete layer, and we're going to want to put this in the background. Basically, the easiest way to do this is to switch over to a left or right side view, and then drag it backwards, oops, until it reaches the back of the design. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing with the liner really quickly. We'll put it on top of the floorboard and the other, make it 3D, and then just drag it back here, line it up. Okay. And whenever we switch back over to the active camera, we're going to need to rescale this a little bit. As you can see, it's starting to look pretty weird. Let's see what we can do. Now our concrete layer is actually rotated a little bit on the orientation. I'm not sure how that happened exactly, but it's all fixed now. We'll need to scale up the layers, but since they're pushed so far back in Z-space, you actually won't be losing any detail or anything. It'll still look exactly the same as the layer did before. It's just weird. It's just a weird quirk of working in After Effects. Now with this liner layer, we'll need to reposition it a little bit. And what I actually ended up doing in the original was scaling down the width a little bit, just to make it a little bit thinner. I didn't like it being so thick. Okay, now looks good, and then we'll just again scale it outwards. Now originally this design was black and white, and the main reason I did that is just because if you look at our floorboard texture, it's got some weird blue on it, and you could do some work in Photoshop to remove that if you know what you're doing, or you could just kind of only take these three boards here and just replace the blue floorboards. But I didn't want to do all that, and so whenever I didn't have it black and white, it looked very weird in the original, so that's why I was using it as black and white, and we'll just continue to do that. I did just want to point out, however, there's no particular reason why it needs to be desaturated, particularly. That's just something I did to save a little bit of time in the original. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll make a quick color correction layer, and go ahead and make it a adjustment layer. And what I like to do sometimes is take a tint effect rather than a hue and saturation. And then I'll also take another effect called CC Composite, and what I want to do is take and change the composite mode to overlay. And what that's going to do more or less is just have the entire image be composited over itself with the overlay blending mode. So basically what we're going to do is darken both the concrete and the liner layers. So, whoop, hang on, sorry. So we'll take the concrete layer, just bring down, see, that much. Somewhere around in there, probably be good. Okay, and then we'll again take this liner layer and we'll just bring down the color, the brightness of it quite a bit. And there, we want it to be almost black, not quite. We do want to keep some of that, retain some of that detail in the wood. It's really nice. Okay, and what we'll also do is create a vignette really quickly. So I'll again just make an adjustment layer, put a quick elliptical mask on it, change it to subtract. Normally I feather about 300 pixels by default. I'll just do 400 here, and then I'll drag a curves effect on there and just darken everything a little bit more. I'm not sure why this particular design is so dark, but it was, and it's too late to change it now, so I guess we're stuck with it. Next, we will light the scene really quickly. Well, actually, before we do that, if you look at the original, you'll see it's a lot closer focused on the floor layer. And the reason that it's like that is just because I went to the camera settings and zoomed in a little bit in order to help it kind of focus on the floor better. And then after zooming in, if we drag it down a little bit, we can focus on it a little bit better. I want to orbit the camera a little bit too. Let's see. There we go. Whoop. Close enough. Okay, so now we can get to lighting the scene. Layer, new light. Like I said, this is just done with one single point light. And let's come to the right view again to help position this where we want. And I'm just going to kind of put it in the dead center in between the entire design. Here's our wall and here's our floor, and we'll just put it somewhere in the middle. Okay, and now if we come to, well, we'll probably want to bring this down a little bit more, probably a little bit closer to the floor. And then when I did, I'm hitting T to bring up the light intensity, and I'll just bring it up really intense, probably somewhere around 400 or 500, if I remember correctly. Let's try that. Whoa, way too intense. Let's see. If we bring it away from the wall a little bit, maybe, and then bringing this intensity down to about 350. Okay, we're getting there. It just takes a little bit of experimentation to get it where you want it. Let's see. Come over to right and bring this up some. And more in the middle. Let's try this. That'll probably be closer to what we wanted originally. No, maybe not. Okay, somewhere around there. We can always darken the concrete and the floorboard layers even more just to help them if the lighting isn't quite working the way you want it to. It's hard to recreate the same lighting scenario more than once, which is what makes a lot of these designs very hard to recreate. The last thing we have to do is just to create some text layers. And what I did in the original is I made 3 different ones and just had it rack focus. What I'll do here, let's see, I'll just write my name. And now if we make this text 3D, actually, we can place it on, we can place it actually on top of the floor layer. So let's do that. Okay. And if we rotate it on the x-axis until we get it about the right rotation, we can then bring this down. Let's see, rotate it a little bit more. And then what I'll do is add a nice deep inner shadow to try and create that cool kind of 3D look. Also, the blending mode of the text should be changed to overlay or multiply, something like that. We'll do overlay. It's probably going to be what we want. And if we right click, choose layer styles, and then choose inner shadow, we can create a nice 3D depth. Now the final thing that we have left to do is just to set up our camera really quickly. And this is pretty easy to do. What we'll do is go ahead and bring down the transform properties and make sure we're on the first frame, keyframe the point of interest and the position. Go to the very last frame, and then we'll just take our camera tracking tool and just scoot over a little bit. Give it some motion. Okay. Awesome. Okay, and now what we're going to want to do is really quickly, we're going to want to do basically the exact same thing with the focus distance and the depth of field. Is just have it set up where we want it to be on the first frame and then control it where we want it to be on the last. So let's turn on depth of field first, and I'll bring up the blur level to about 425. You normally don't want to go higher than about 500 with the blur level, generally speaking. And I'll bring the aperture up quite a bit as well, maybe about 125, somewhere around there. Let's see. Okay, and we can see it's kind of focused on this weird point in the wall, so what we'll do is just bring down the focus distance until it focuses where we want it to. And when we're doing this, we're going to need to bring down the resolution of the render so that we can work a lot faster. Okay, so to speed things up, I like to kind of try to guess where it's going to be and then just work from there. So it's definitely wrong there. Now you'll see our focus distance, and well, actually our aperture is way too high right now. Let's see, let's bring down the blur level just a little bit, and also the aperture. Okay, and then we can get this focused. It's just insane right now. I'm going to want to bring this down quite a bit. Okay, that's pretty close to where we want it. We can even bring it down more. That 100 aperture is, that's what it was in the original composition, but like I said, this is a very difficult design to recreate, and this particular one is quite different between the two comps, so sorry about that. But like, you'll keyframe the focus distance, and then we'll just fix up the focus distance, right? And the last thing I want to do with this design is work on it so that it looks a little bit more cinematic. For whatever reason with this particular design, I just really wanted it to look like it was shot on anamorphic camera. And what's cool about After Effects is there's actually a couple of cool tricks we can do to emulate that. Now, if you don't know what an anamorphic lens is, it's basically a lens that the glass inside of is bent so that the image is actually captured stretched. And then in post, it is re-stretched out. And one of the most obvious effects of an anamorphic lens, other than the lens flares, is stretched bokeh, or blur. So as you can see here, our out of focus areas look like crap to begin with, so we're going to definitely want to fix that. We'll set it to decagon, which is about as close as you can get to a circular bokeh. Okay, and it's already looking nicer. Here's where we're really going to want to be looking. And I'm going to bring up the highlight gain just a little bit so that our out of focus areas will really have a nice blur to them. I'm going to bring down the threshold a little bit as well. Let's see. Okay, that's too much. Let's try 190s. Okay, that's looking nice. And then what I want to do is basically take this iris aspect ratio and set it to the same stretch ratio as an anamorphic lens, which is normally either 1.33 or 1.5. So I'll do 1.33. And then you'll notice, if we look closely up here, you can see the bokeh is kind of rotated weirdly. And for whatever reason, After Effects just picks it up that way. And so what I'll do is just grab the iris rotation and set it to 90 degrees instead. And then we'll have a nice stretched anamorphic looking bokeh. And the final thing that I want to do is add some film grain. And that's also really easy to try and fake inside of After Effects. So we'll do a new layer really quickly. New solid, I always say. I've been working in Photoshop recently, so my mind goes to saying layer instead of solid. It's weird. And we'll call this grain. And I will add some grain to it. We'll want to move it on top of everything and make it an adjustment layer. And then choose grain. Type in grain over here. And then I'll drag on the add grain. Okay, and then I'll change the grain emulation settings to Kodak Vision 250D, which if you don't know anything about film stock, that's kind of a default, a pretty industry standard one. Kodak 200T, 250D, and there's another one that is 500T. Those are the, oh wait, here it is down here. Those are kind of the common ISO speeds for Kodak for film nowadays. These are older film stocks, so they're not going to look, the grain isn't going to be emulating that modern of a look of grain, but this is fairly close. I think the Vision series was used around the early 2000s, so it's not too old, but it does a pretty good job of just emulating some grain. Okay, we'll go ahead and change the viewing mode from preview to final output. And you see our grain is colored. It's got some green and red specks to it. And since this image is black and white, we'll just come down here to color and click monochromatic. And it will instantly go to black and white. Okay, so now if we take a look at this wonderful design we've created, very kind of dark, creepy, but cinematic looking design, racking focus between these two titles, really great. Hopefully this tutorial has been very helpful for you, taught you some cool 3D camera tricks, and I can't wait for you guys to recreate this on your own or apply this to something entirely different. But I'm Mackenzie Criswell, and I'll see you next time.